All right, so let's talk about topic 10, part C, and we're continuing our study on circles. Now, notice one of the worksheets looks like this. So it's going to say the following equations of a circle are written in general form. Now, this is general form. This is general form. And they want you to write it in standard form. Now, remember, standard form from last week looks like this. This is standard form. Okay, standard form. So standard form is x minus h squared plus y minus k squared equals r squared. That's standard form of a circle. So this is standard form. General form is where it looks like this. So you have a bunch of terms. Notice that in the equation of a circle, you have an x squared and you have a y squared. So you have two variables involved, an x squared and a y squared. Okay, just like if you were to multiply this out, FOIL this out, and FOIL this out, you would get an x squared and a y squared. Okay, but this is standard form. Now remember, when you did standard form last week, the center was hk and the radius was equal to r, not r squared, but remember r. All right, so what they want you to do though is to get this to look like this. Okay, now to get this to look like this, you have to complete the square. So that's one of the reasons, why we talked about completing the square probably about a week and a half ago. That was one of the worksheets you had to do when solving a quadratic equation. One of the worksheets was on completing the square, and I think on your test, yeah, you did have a problem in your test where you had to complete the square to solve a quadratic equation. So that's one of the reasons why you're studying completing the square, because it's used quite often. So to get this circle that's in general form to a circle in standard form, you have to complete the square. All right, so let's talk about that. All right, so when completing the square, remember these ideas. You have to get the x's together, the x terms together, and you have to get the y terms together. So in our example, the x terms and the y terms are grouped together. The constant has to be on the other side. Okay? The constant has to be on the other side. Now, you're going to remember this, what I'm about to say, based on what you learned on completing the square before. If I cover, and let me go ahead and find a sticky note. If I cover up this part right here, and I ask you to complete the square on the x's, here's what you did. You said, I'm going to go ahead and rewrite this part over. So remember what you did. You took the coefficient of x, and I'm going to use scratch paper here. I'll do it right here. You took the coefficient of x, which is 12, and you divided by 2. Remember that? Then whatever that was, you squared it. And so 12 divided by 2 is 6, and 6 squared is 36. And remember, you added that to both sides. All right? So what's happening now is this. So if I rewrite this part here, kind of covering this up for right now, if I rewrite this, you're going to say plus 36, just like you did with quadratic equations, but what you do to one side, you have to do to the other. So negative 2 plus 36. So plus 36 plus 36. If you're doing this correctly, remember when you did completing the square with quadratic equations, if you're doing this correctly, this should now be a binomial squared. So this is a perfect square trinomial. And it is, because now you can write it as x plus 6 squared. And you see now it's starting to look like this. See that? This right here is starting to look like this. Okay? Then you do the same thing with the y's though. All right, so we're going to say plus. All right, and we do the same thing with the y. So you're going to say y squared minus 2y plus. All right, so let's talk about what we're going to add here. So just like we did with the x's, you take the coefficient of y, which is negative 2, you divide that by 2, and then you square. So negative 2 divided by 2 is a negative 1. Negative 1 times itself is a positive 1. So we're going to add 1 to both sides. And if I'm doing this correctly, this should now be a perfect square trinomial. So I can factor this as a binomial squared. And when you factor this, this becomes y minus 1 squared equal, and then just use your calculator to add these three numbers together. You should always have three numbers here. This added to both sides, this added to both sides, and then this constant coming from here. So negative 2 plus 36 is 34. 34 plus 1 is 35. All right, and so that's your standard form. That goes here. That's your standard form. Remember, this is standard form. So you get x plus 6 squared plus y minus 1 squared equals 35. All right. Now remember the center, just like you did in a previous lesson, the center is HK. So be careful, and when I'm looking at some of your worksheets on that, most of you did this correctly. So most of you knew that the center is not 6 negative 1. Remember, it's got to be the form x minus h. So the center is negative 6, positive 1. And then to find the radius, you take the square root of 35. So the square root of 35. I'm going to put it right here for right now. And then you simplify if you can. Well, the only perfect square that goes into 35 is 1, so that's the answer. You cannot do anything else with it. And so that's it. So to get this equation that's in general form to an equation in standard form, you have to complete the square on the x's and you have to complete the square on the y's. All right, so let's look at another example. And so this is number 2. Now notice when we do number 2, remember when we did this, we grouped the x's together and we grouped the y's together. Here though, the x's and y's aren't grouped together. So we're going to rearrange this to where they are grouped together, and we want the constant on the other side. So we need to bring this negative 3 to the other side. So I'm going to say x squared minus 6x, put those together, and I'm going to go ahead and put it down here so I can have more room. So x squared minus 6x, and remember you're going to add a number here, right? Plus, and then do the same thing with the y's. Y squared plus 4y. Y squared plus 4y. I'm going to add another number here. And then that's going to equal, bring this 3 to the other side, so that'll be negative 3 rather, so you're going to add 3 to both sides to get 3 here. All right, so that's the first thing you should do. Group the x's together, group the y's together, bring the constant to the other side. All right, so now let's determine what we're going to add here, and let's determine what we're going to add here. So remember what we did. So basically what we did, I'm going to cover up the y's for right now. We take the coefficient of x. The coefficient of x is negative 6. Always divide by 2. Whatever that is, you're going to square it. So negative 6 divided by 2 is a negative 3. Negative 3 squared is a positive 9. So we're going to add 9 to both sides. So plus 9, plus 9. Remember, what you do to one side, you do to the other to keep it balanced. If you're doing this correctly, this should be a binomial squared. So when you factor this, this becomes x minus 3 squared. And it's easy to determine what's here because you see this right here, this number right here, that number, negative 3, that's what you see here. So if I go back right here, see this number right here, that positive 6, that's what you see here. See this number right here, negative 1, that's what you see here. Okay, so things like that can help you determine if what you're doing is correct. Then you do the same thing with the y's now. So I'm going to say plus, and now we're going to do the y's. So you take the coefficient of y, which is 4, divide by 2. Whatever that is, you're going to square it. Well, 4 divided by 2 is 2, and 2 squared is 4. So we're going to add 4 to both sides. Don't forget to do to both sides. You should have 3 numbers on this side. The constant from the original equation, and then what you added here goes here, and what you added here goes here. So remember, 3 numbers on this side. If you're doing this correctly, this should now be a binomial squared. And so when you factor y squared plus 4y plus 4, you get y plus 2 squared. and then you add these together. 9 plus 4 is 13. 13 plus 3 is what, 16? Okay. All right. And there's your standard form. There's your standard form. So that goes here. So the answer here is going to be x minus 3 squared plus y plus 2 squared equal 16. The center, now the rest of this is what you've had last week. So the center is positive 3, negative 2. Now remember though, the radius, don't say the radius is square root of 16 and leave it like that, because remember you have to simplify. So 16 is a perfect square. So the square root of 16 is 4. So you got to say 4 here. Make sure you say 4 and not the square root of 16. Always make sure you simplify the radicals if you can. And that was number 2. So let's look at one more, and that's going to be number 3. All right, let's go to number 3. So in number 3, we have this. So remember, this is general form. That's general form. That's why you have all these terms together. Notice, it's important you notice this, because knowing what kind of equation you have helps you, because in this course you're going to be dealing with all kinds of equations, all kinds of functions later on. Notice you see an x squared, you see a y squared. That's going to be a circle. Okay? If all you saw, let me just kind of remind you, if all you saw, I'm going to cover up that y squared right here. If all you saw was this, x squared minus 10x equals 4, that's a quadratic equation, right? But the fact that there's a y squared in it now makes it a circle. Okay, so quadratic, one variable x, and you see an x squared, that's quadratic. Putting a y squared in there makes it a circle. All right, so you have to know that when you have an x squared and a y squared, that's a circle. If all you have is this, that's a quadratic equation, and in this case, it's not factorable, so you would have to use a quadratic formula. So those are all different things that you need to be aware of. All right, but we know it's a circle. In fact, we know it's a circle because the directions said that, right? You knew it was a circle. All right, but you want to write it in standard form. So we're going to group the x together, and the x is already grouped, and we're going to group the y's together. You may say, well, there's no, the x's had 2 terms, the y only had 1. Well, that's fine. You saw something like this on one of the worksheets from last week. All right, so let's do the x's first. All right, so we're going to do the x's first. And sometimes it helps if you kind of cover up some parts here. So we're going to take the coefficient of x, which is negative 10. You can divide by 2. Whatever that is, you're going to square it. Negative 10 divided by 2 is a negative 5. A negative 5 times itself is a positive 25. So that's what you're going to add to both sides. So basically what's going to happen is this. You're going to say x squared minus 10x plus some number plus y squared, and I'm going to put plus some number for right now, equal 4. All right. So remember, and now notice the constant's already on the other side. So you need that constant from the original equation on the other side. All right. So this says I'm going to add 25 to both sides. I'm going to put 25 here. I'm going to put 25 here. Okay. Now remember, I did say you're going to add. You should have 3 numbers here, right? Okay. Well, let's think about this. So, well, let's finish this part up here. So this is now a binomial squared, so that's x minus 5 squared. So remember that negative 5 right here? So that's negative 5. You don't see an a y term, right? You don't see a y term. So if you think about it, and I'm going to put it right here just to kind of show you. So you see how I had an x squared and an x term? You can, if you want to, say this, y squared plus 0y. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and rewrite this, and most students don't, but I just want to show you why you're going to put a 0 there. So I'm going to go ahead and rewrite this for right now. So we have x squared minus 10x plus 25 plus y squared plus 0y plus a number. All right, so notice that y squared plus 0y is still y squared. So I have an x term and I have a y term now. So if you take the coefficient of y, which is 0, divide by 2, divide by 2 and then square it. 0 divided by 2 is still 0, and 0 squared is still 0. So you're going to add 0 to both sides. So notice I still have 3 numbers here. So 4 plus 25 plus 0. And this when you factor it is x minus 5 squared plus this right here when you factor, remember that 0 right here, that negative 5, this is y plus 0 squared, or y minus, it doesn't matter, y plus or y minus, I'm going to put y minus 0 squared, and then equal, and then 4 plus 25 plus 0 is 29. So the point's this. The point is when there is no y term, you can write y squared as a binomial like this, y minus 0 squared. And then that's going to equal 29. All right. A lot of students have trouble with this idea because they don't see a y like you see an x here, and so they get confused. All right, but just remember there's no y. Y squared is the same thing as saying y minus 0. And the reason is if you want to do completing the square, you would do this. So your standard form is this then. You're going to say x minus 5 squared plus. Now, remember, sometimes we prefer, instead of writing y minus 0 squared, to leave it as y squared. So y squared equal 29. So there's your answer there. And then the center is 5. Now don't get confused with this. You had one like this on a worksheet. So if all you have is y squared, remember that 0 right here. Think of that 0. So that's 0 here. So your center is 5, 0. And the radius is the square root of this number. So the radius is square root of 29, and the only perfect square that goes into 29 is 1. All right. So on the worksheet, you're going to have one that's going to look like this. So just remember about the fact that if it's just y squared, it looks like this. If it's x squared without an x, it will be the same thing, x minus 0 squared instead. All right. So that was, I think, enough problems to get you through the lesson dealing with part C. Now remember, for some of you, you may need to go back through those lessons, those videos that are in those lessons. Okay? All right, so that was that one. Now, let's look at the other topic.